I never believed in ghost stories. They were just tales people told to make the night feel colder, to add a thrill to their mundane lives. At least that's what I used to think. Until the night I stumbled upon that tea stall. The one that felt too quiet, too wrong. I was traveling through a remote town, the kind of place that barely showed up on maps. My bus had broken down a few miles back, and the driver told us it would take hours before help arrived. Most passengers decided to wait inside, but I needed air, so I walked. The road was deserted, shrouded in a thick mist that clung to the trees like something alive. A few scattered houses stood in the distance, their windows dark, lifeless. The only sign of life was a small, dimly lit tea stall by the roadside. It was an old wooden shack, barely holding itself together, with a flickering lantern hanging from the entrance. I hesitated. Something about the place felt unnatural, not haunted, not yet, but off. Like a photograph where everyone is smiling, but their eyes don't match. Still, my throat was dry, and my body was chilled from the damp night air. A cup of tea wouldn't hurt. As I stepped closer, I noticed the silence. Not just the absence of voices. There were no insects chirping, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of the highway. It was as if sound itself had been swallowed by the night. A single man stood behind the counter. He was old, his skin leathery from years under the sun. His expression blank, his eyes, though, they were too alert, too focused. He didn't greet me, didn't ask what I wanted. He simply poured a cup of tea, placed it in front of me, and waited. I looked around. There were wooden benches, empty except for one lone customer, sitting in the farthest corner. He had his back turned, hunched over, as if whispering to someone unseen. The tea smelled strong, spiced, yet there was something unfamiliar about it. I took a cautious sip, bitter, too bitter. A strange warmth spread through me, and for a moment I felt lightheaded. I turned to ask the old man if he had sugar, but my voice caught in my throat. He was staring at me, unblinking, not at my face, at my hands. I looked down. The cup was shaking slightly in my grip. No, not shaking, trembling, as if something inside was moving. A gust of wind blew through the stall, yet the lantern didn't flicker. The other customer, the one in the corner, stopped whispering. I suddenly felt exposed, like I had stepped onto a stage where everyone knew their lines except me. The old man finally spoke, his voice dry and brittle. "You shouldn't have come here." His words sent a chill through my spine. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but my legs felt heavy. The tea in my hands had gone cold, despite the rising steam curling from the cup. And then, from the farthest corner of the stall, the other customer began to turn around. The man in the corner turned slowly, too slowly, as if time itself hesitated around him. The dim lantern light barely touched his face. But what I saw made my breath hitch. His skin was pale, unnaturally so, stretched tight over his bones like dried leather. His lips were cracked, but what unsettled me the most were his eyes. Hollow, sunken pits that reflected nothing. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My fingers tightened around the cup of tea, the ceramic suddenly feeling unnaturally cold, almost icy. The old man behind the counter hadn't moved, his gaze still fixed on my hands. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, wrapping around me like invisible hands pressing against my throat. The man in the corner finally spoke. His voice was a whisper, barely more than a breath, but it carried through the empty stall as if the walls themselves were listening. "Did you drink it?" I swallowed hard. Just a sip, I said, though my voice sounded far away, like I wasn't the one speaking. A slow smile stretched across his cracked lips. Then you're already part of it. A shiver ran down my spine. I turned back to the old man, hoping for an explanation, but he was no longer looking at me. His head was bowed slightly, his lips moving soundlessly, as if reciting a prayer. The unease in my stomach grew. The air felt heavier now, thick with something I couldn't quite name. I glanced back at the road outside, expecting to see the headlights of a passing vehicle, a sign of normalcy. There was nothing. Just darkness, stretching endlessly, swallowing the world beyond the weak glow of the lantern. Something was wrong. I placed the cup on the counter and pushed it away. I should go, I muttered, more to myself than to them. The old man finally looked up, his eyes filled with something I couldn't decipher. Regret? Fear? Leaving won't change it now, he murmured. My pulse quickened. Change what? The man in the corner chuckled. A dry, rasping sound that made my skin crawl. The tea chooses, he said, and it's chosen you. A gust of wind rattled the wooden beams of the stall, but the lantern remained steady. My breath came quicker, my heartbeat loud in my ears. This wasn't just an eerie roadside tea stall. Something was happening here. Something unnatural. I forced myself to move, stepping away from the counter. The wooden planks beneath my feet creaked, but the sound felt muted, distant. I turned toward the road, willing my legs to carry me back, away from whatever this was. But then I noticed something strange. My footsteps weren't making an echo. I turned sharply, my eyes darting between the two men. The old man shook his head almost sadly. You don't hear it, do you? Hear what? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The others. The moment he said it, I became aware of something else. A faint sound just at the edge of hearing, like voices carried on the wind. Whispers, dozens of them. I spun around, searching the darkness beyond the tea stall. There was nothing there. No shapes, no figures, but I could feel them. The man in the corner stood up. It's always the same, he said. They come here thinking it's just another place to rest, another place to drink tea. My skin prickled. What are you talking about? His lips twitched. Look at your hands. I hesitated, then slowly raised them. My breath caught. The steam from the tea was still rising, curling unnaturally around my fingers. But it wasn't dissipating. It was sticking to my skin, wrapping around it like tendrils of mist sinking into my flesh. The whispers grew louder. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stumbled back. What's happening to me? The old man didn't answer. He simply sighed, as if he had seen this many times before. You shouldn't have come here, he repeated. The shadows beyond the stall shifted. Something was watching. And then, somewhere in the distance, something began to move. The whispers were no longer distant. They were all around me now, pressing in from the shadows like unseen hands reaching out. My breath came in shallow gasps, my skin crawling with an unbearable sensation, like 1,000 invisible eyes were watching, waiting. The tea stall felt smaller, as if the darkness outside had closed in, swallowing the world beyond its wooden walls. The old man behind the counter remained still, his face carved with resignation, while the other man, the one who had been sitting in the corner, was smiling. Not a normal smile. No warmth, no amusement. Just a slow, stretching curve of his cracked lips, revealing too many teeth. Sharp, uneven, stained with something dark. I tried to move, to run, but my legs felt heavy, like they were sinking into the ground. The mist around my hand had now spread up my arms, curling like living vines, seeping into my skin. I clawed at them, trying to shake them off, but the more I struggled, the colder my body became. The old man finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Stop fighting it." I snapped my gaze to him. "What is this? What's happening to me?" His eyes flickered with something I couldn't place. Sorrow, maybe. "The tea binds you," he said. "Once you drink it, you belong here." My breath hitched. What the hell does that mean? The man in the corner let out a dry chuckle. "You'll see soon enough." A sudden noise made my blood run cold. A low, dragging sound, like something crawling across the wooden floor behind me. I turned slowly, heart hammering against my ribs. At first, I saw nothing. Just the empty benches, the dim glow of the lantern barely holding back the encroaching darkness. Then I saw long, thin fingers stretched unnaturally, its skin grey and wrinkled like old rotting parchment. It was reaching from beneath the stall's counter, its nails scratching against the wood. The whispers turned into moans. I stumbled back, knocking over the teacup. It shattered against the ground, but instead of liquid poihui, thick black sludge oozed from the broken pieces, twisting like smoke, moving on its own. The old man sighed. "You shouldn't have broken it." Something such shifted bar, beneath the floorboards. The air turned a thick bar, suffocating, as the ground beneath me buckled. I felt something moving under my feet, something live. Then the first scream came. It wasn't from me. It came from the shadows outside. A voice, shrill, filled with agony. Then another, and another, dozens of voices screaming at once, filling the night with an unbearable wail of suffering. The lantern flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows that didn't match the shapes of the objects around me. The stall was collapsing in on itself, the walls bending, stretching, warping like they were made of flesh instead of wood. I ran, or at least I tried. My body felt sluggish, as if I were wading through something thick and invisible. The man in the corner didn't move. He just watched. I made it to the edge of the stall, to the open road, but the road was gone. Where there should have been gravel and dirt, there was now endless blackness, a void stretching infinitely in all directions. I turned back toward the stall, but it was changing. The wooden planks bled, dark liquid oozing from between them. The old man was melting, his features distorting, his flesh peeling away like wax under a flame. The whispers turned into laughter, low, guttural, inhuman. The crawling hand from beneath the counter was no longer alone. More hands emerged, long, thin, grasping. Some had too many fingers, some not enough. They reached, clawing at the air, searching for me. I staggered backward, but there was nowhere left to go. The tea stall wasn't just haunted. It was alive. And it was hungry. Then, just as the darkness closed around me, I felt something grab my ankle. Cold, wet fingers pulling me down. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The tea had taken me. The darkness swallowed me whole. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was something else. Something alive. A suffocating void that pressed against my skin, worming its way into my mind. The whispers had stopped. The laughter had faded. There was nothing. Then a sound. Dripping. Slow, rhythmic, echoing in the emptiness. My body was no longer my own. I couldn't feel my limbs, couldn't move, couldn't even tell if I was breathing. But I was aware of something shifting around me, just beyond sight. A soft glow flickered in the distance, dim, pulsing, like a dying ember. As I focused on it, the darkness peeled away, revealing something even worse. I was back in the tea stall. But it wasn't the same. The wooden walls were rotting, warped and pulsing, like living flesh. The lantern above flickered, but its light no longer felt warm. It was sickly, casting long, twisting shadows that moved even when nothing else did. And the tea was everywhere. It dripped from the ceiling, seeped from the wooden beams, pooled on the floor in thick black puddles. The air was thick with its scent, earthy, bitter, but beneath it, something rancid, something wrong. Then I saw them, figures, dozens of them, seated at the empty tables, silent, motionless. At first, they looked human. Their clothes were old, tattered, stained with time. Their heads were bowed, as if asleep, but as I stepped closer, I realized the truth. They weren't breathing. Their skin was cracked like dry clay, their hands frozen in place, fingers curled around cold, untouched cups of tea. Their lips were sewn shut with thin black threads. And their eyes, God, their eyes, were nothing but empty sockets, hollow and dark. They had been here for a long time. A chair scraped behind me. I spun around. The one man in the corner, she was still there. But now I could see him clearly. His face was not his own. It shifted, flickering like a distorted image on an old television screen. Too many faces. Blurred into one, young, old, male, female, changing with each heartbeat, but his eyes remained the same, black, endless, starving. He tilted his head. You understand now, don't you? I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, burning, as if I'd swallowed hot ash. He gestured to the figures around me. They drank the tea, just like you. A cold dread settled in my chest. No, I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. He smiled, revealing teeth that weren't human. Yes. The old man behind the counter stood, motionless, his face void of expression, his eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw what he truly was. Not a man, not anymore. He had been here for centuries, trapped, serving the tea, watching as others joined the endless cycle. I was next. The figures at the tables began to move. Their heads jerked upward in unison. The black threads that sealed their lips snapped undone, and from their mouths came a sound so horrible, so unnatural, that my mind barely comprehended it. It wasn't screaming, it was laughter, cold, hollow, wrong. The tea stall has shuddered, the walls pulsating, the black liquid rising around my feet like creeping vines. The man in the corner leaned forward. Drink again, he whispered. My hands moved against my will. The cup was suddenly in front of me, filled with something thick, dark, moving. My reflection rippled on its surface, but it wasn't me anymore. It was something else, something twisted. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. This wasn't a tea stall. It was a trap, a place that existed outside of time, feeding on the lost, the curious, the desperate. And once you drank, you became part of it. The old man had once been a traveler, just like me. So had the man in the corner, so had all the others, and now they were waiting for me to take my place. I had one chance. I gritted my teeth, fighting against the invisible force guiding my hands. The cup trembled. The black liquid inside whispered my name. No, I rasped. The tea screeched. The figures lunged. I threw the cup onto the ground. The moment it shattered, the stall collapsed around me. The walls cracked like brittle bones. The lantern exploded, filling the space with blinding white light. The figures shrieked, their forms disintegrating into dust. The old man let out a guttural cry as his body crumpled inward, folding into himself like a dying flame. And the man in the corner, his face melted away, revealing nothing but a black, gaping void before he vanished. I felt myself being pulled, dragged backward through the darkness, through time itself. The world spun, twisted, shattered, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, I was outside. The road stretched before me, empty and quiet. The tea stall was gone, not abandoned, not ruined, just gone, as if it had never existed. I was alone, or so I thought. As I took a shaky step forward, a cold breeze brushed past my ear, carrying a whisper so faint, so distant, that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Almost. See you again, traveler.